Yeah, no, it's so good to see you again. How are you today?
Yeah, good, thank you.
Okay, so we are just starting to talk about one of your projects. And you're collaborating with the Department of Conservation of Antiquities and Works of Art at the University of Western Attica. Is that what it's called, Attica?
Yeah, Western Attica. It's the county of Athens,
Okay,
the county that Athens is in.
okay.
So it's in Athens.
Yeah, and you're exploring the biology and chemistry of conservation through an active collaboration with the department's leader, Professor Georgios Panagiaris. In his lab, and correct me, I am trying to research on what you do. In this lab, you have been very simplistically saying, working with bacteria and yeast. So in this context, I was curious to know what are unruly or docile objects before you talk about your project.
So this is a concept that was laid down by a researcher called the surname Rubio, but it was brought to our attention by a researcher at UCL, University College London, called Helia Markle, who works with conservation and conservation of performance a lot. And so she's one of the advisors on the project. And so she introduced this term, and she was talking, she said that in the paper, well, I read the paper later. So in the paper, one interesting example that makes it quite clear is this idea of like, well, there's objects which are easy to look after. So you've got objects like paintings or stone pieces and things like that, and they just sort of sit there, and the conservators kind of know how to deal with them. And then there's unruly objects, which are these things they don't know. They've got mixture of materials in, might be living materials or something like that. And in this research paper, the writer gives the example of Eva Hess's works with latex, which when she made them were, like very soft and almost transparent, but now are sort of brittle and yellow. And so these are kind of unruly objects that they can't kind of know whether was it her intention that they would be like this, or was it or would she want them to be kind of retired at this point? And there's a tendency to retire objects like that, but it's because, and there's this idea that maybe it's not the artist's intention that it was like this, but that ship's kind of sailed. If you look at, and this is me rather than the researcher, that ship's kind of sailed, because like if you look at the amazing kind of Greek statues like the Antiquities from the Parthenon and things like that, and as far as most people know, they're these kind of beautiful white objects and things, but they weren't like that when they were originally made. They were painted in quite gaudy colours, and often gold, blues, reds, lots of different pigments and things on it, like lapis lazuli and things like that. So I mean, so they're using this argument that the artist's intention isn't to maintain the artist's intention, but like then if it's over a certain age or something like that, then it's still shown. And then this idea of the white Greek statue has become this like constant idea in what is great art, what is beautiful. And it's nothing like the original artist's intention. So it's really interesting to think about that. And so we were looking at it in the context of bioart as an unruly object, and the reticence of some museums, a lot of museums, to incorporate that in their collection, where they might incorporate other kinds of contemporary art that are equally difficult to manage, but there's a sort of nervousness around bioart. And so in the Department of Antiquities and Works of Art, one of the researchers there working with Georgios Panagiaris is a researcher called Karen Botsos, and he's studying the microbiome of the antiquities and things like that. So we were kind of interested in that, and they're also looking at, like, can you rebalance the microbiome of these stone pieces to help preserve them? So could you intervene in the bacterial and yeast flora that's on these objects to maintain them? And he does a lot of electron microscopy to understand the microbes that are damaging the antiquities. So that was one side of it. And then the other side of it was to work with different conservators and contemporary art conservators and conservators of antiquities, in particular Zoe Saki, that I worked with. And she is working on a lot of these kind of Greek antiquity sites and preserving these things, these sort of walls and objects and all sorts of locations in Athens. And basically she told me the whole process of conservation of works of art and how they do that. And then part of my work is kind of a response to that. So I've made this object that's almost the most difficult thing to conserve. It's stone, because I wanted it to be stone, it's marble. But she said that things like holes are the worst thing, and bacteria that get in there, they're the worst, they're terrible. And the very worst thing is plants. So plants growing into the objects.
Okay.
So I made a few what I call sketches. They're not, I wouldn't call it a finished artwork. They're sketches or kind of maquettes towards a bigger idea that I would like to make in due course, if it was possible. So I've been working with Alex May and Athanasios Velios, as well as Zoe Saki, on another aspect to the project where we've been looking at the uses of blockchain technologies and a way of preserving the artist's intention. So the idea has been to embed RFID tags into these marble sculptures that point towards a file which contains all my documentation and my ideas. And then we're going to do another file that contains the conservation report. And then that will point at the other file. And so we're going to try and do this through blockchain technology. So it's about the provenance, and also, but that's not as important as the fact that it's trying to preserve the artist's intention, and it's embedded in the object. Because Zoe said that one of the hardest things when she gets an object to conserve is to know what other conservators have done in the past. So they're supposed to keep records of this, but it's very hard for her if it's come from a different place or something like that. How do you get those records, and how do they keep up to date and get transferred? So we were looking at ways that you could do this using blockchain technologies. So that's kind of the project. It's about problematizing and exploring conservation. So it's almost like I'm kind of applying the usual techniques that I do of the research and the lab kind of work and processes, but doing it about the idea of conservation. And yeah, we had some really fascinating conversations as well about the idea with working with the contemporary art conservators in the department, talking to them as well, that maybe my alteration of historical objects, although it's not preserving, it is conserving, because there's a difference. They kind of defined and helped me understand the difference between preservation and conservation. And conservation is about preserving the story of the object and the original intention of the object. And so by altering objects and bringing them kind of back to life and bringing attention to them, like the pneumothorax machine that I carved and engraved, that's telling the story of the object. It's not preserving the object, I've changed it, but it's conserving the object. So that was quite an interesting thing that came up as well.
Yeah, while I was researching on your project, I was thinking about the distinction between conservation and preservation, and the other linguistic variations, which I don't understand much of. And I was wondering why in France curators are referred to as conservators, while conservators are referred to as restorers. So it kind of confuses me.
Well, a curator takes care of the object,
Yeah.
because it's from the Greek cura, to care, and a restorer would repair the object, but a conservator would be about caring for the object as well and conserving its story, as I understand it. But I mean, you'd need to ask a conservator. You'd need to ask like Zoe, my collaborator here, because this isn't something we went into. The French, we were already dealing with the Greek and the English.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, this idea of cura, because they have the sort of the pure root of most of these words in coming from the Greek language, which is interesting.
You visited a prison in Philadelphia when you were here, and did that inspire you for the first sketch, or what was that?
So yeah, I visited just as a tourist when I was having an exhibition in Philadelphia, I visited the Eastern State Penitentiary, which is a fascinating and very beautiful building, and it's probably the most aesthetic kind of place I've ever been to, really, because it's decayed because it got closed and then the rain got in and damaged it and stuff. And then what they've done is decided that it reached a stage of kind of perfect, beautiful decay, and they've decided to preserve it in this state. So they're not bringing it back to how it was. They put some chairs and objects and things in there, and they have art installations in there. But mostly it's this kind of peeling paint and just this wonderful sort of abandoned thing. And it's kind of a panopticon, because the guards could observe the prisoners down all these different wings and things. So it's like an amazing place. And this idea of this like halted decay, like halted at a certain point, was really fascinating to me. So that was the where it inspired me. And so we've got these 3 sketches that I made. One of them has gone to Athens, to Zoe and to the lab, and to Athanasios Karambotsos, and so he's going to be looking at it under the scanning electron microscope at the bacteria and whatever in it. I found the marble originally from eBay, little tiny fragments of it that basically some guy had found on the beach, and he was selling really cheap, but they're really damaged, so they're kind of like sea-worn marble. And that was but most people wouldn't want that, but that was perfect for me. I don't mind if it has the odd crack in it. I'm not sure if it has. I don't think it's got too bad cracks, but it had this like already it had started to go green in places and things and stuff going into it. And so it's already got microbes, I think, in it, because it's been floating around in the sea. Well, not floating around because it's marble, but washed around in the sea. So one piece has gone to Zoe. One piece is staying with me in a box at the moment as I'm decaying it and keeping an eye on its state. And at some point, I'm going to try and preserve it in its state of perfect decay. And another piece I've embedded in a Vinogradsky column, which is a bacterial ecosystem, a self-sustaining bacterial ecosystem. So it's in a jar with all these microbes acting on it. And then I figured I was going to kind of get it out every so often and photograph it and put it back again and see what happens as the bacteria decay it. So the piece it was carved and then it was painted. We used I used contemporary acrylic paints rather than the historic paints because I'm now, and I thought that was a good thing to do. So I've used high quality artist acrylics on the work, and then I've used some extracted RNA of SARS-CoV-2, from an RNA construct. So it's not the actual disease; it's a reagent used in experiments. So some of that on there, but as a timestamp to say this was during the pandemic, so there's a trace of this in it. Then I put the mud from a Vinogradsky column all over all three pieces, and then I put agar on it, dilute agar painted all over it, so the whole thing was like soaked in agar. And then I added seeds, which then I had to pick off again after I'd photographed it. I had to pick them off the one that I was sending to Greece because because of Brexit, I can't send plants to the EU. So I had to pick all the seeds off again. And then she's planted the seeds onto it there under my instructions. Just added complexity. But all this stuff is interesting, like how do you ship these kind of works and she sent me instructions on how to do it, to ship like as if it was an antiquity that she was getting. So it's quite an interesting process there.
Yeah, when I read about that, and you're saying about the Vinogradsky column and the mud that you collected for the project, I was wondering, because you have been a student of literature, does this have any roots to literature?
Oh, I wasn't really ever a student of literature. I studied fine art, so
oh, you did fine art.
Yeah, fine art. Yeah. So but I read, obviously.
Yeah.
A lot of reading involved with it. But I mean, I wasn't really thinking about the literature that it connects to is Sergei Vinogradsky's Microbiology of Soil that he wrote in the 19th century, and he believed that you had to look at bacteria as in a whole ecosystem rather than separated out. So he was kind of considered to be a maniac at the time for these ideas, which obviously didn't help much then, but it's exactly the paradigm we're in now that we have things like genomics tools and we can do metagenomics. Now Vinogradsky's ideas are kind of coming into their own, but a bit late for him, like about 150 years later than he wanted them to be doable, I suppose.
Yeah,
but he wrote extensively about all this.
Yeah, in like somewhere, I don't remember where, and I was trying to look for it where I read it, but William Blake's poem, "To See a World in a Grain of Sand and a heaven in a wildflower, hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour." Someone wrote that the roots could be in the Vinogradsky column, which I didn't understand the connection, and I was like, maybe it has an answer to that. So I was, because there is a lot of poetry in your, consciously or unconsciously, there is a lot of poetry in your work. So I found that very deep. I would also like to know, and this is my main sustaining question, that how has your pursuit of decay been in this project, and what are the effects of the physical manifestations of memory during the pandemic on the sketch that you retain, or even memories of the past, that could have unconsciously been embedded in your work? Like the seeds, for example, where did that thought come from?
Well, the seeds came from Zoe saying that her worst problem was tree roots that grow into, I mean, these roots growing in, say she's restoring an ancient building, so she works with, places like the Parthenon, things like that. And there are trees nearby some of these ancient Greek temples and city walls and old roads and things, and that they restore. and they repair and, well, they restore some part of, or sometimes they just try to conserve and keep it able to tell its story. Because I guess the difference between conservation and restoration is like the problem with Knossos in Crete, where the English archaeologists went there and kind of rebuilt it with these concrete pillars, and so it's not the original site, and some of the things were taken off to like Heraclean Museum, and some of them are obviously in the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford and things like that. So it's the idea he restored it, he tried to rebuild it back up, but that's not really. And then it does tell the story. Obviously, it's iconic because they use it in all the publicity that you see when you go there and you're trying as a tourist. But it's not. That's the difference between restoration and conservation. Is conservation's more like allowing those existing objects to tell their story, and then preservation is trying to stop them from changing at all. Back to, I think, I mean, we'd need to talk to the actual people representing those groups, because this is based on the conversations that I've had with some of those people, but not all of them. I haven't like surveyed those groups. So yeah, it came through this idea that the worst thing, and these trees will grow into the thing and they just force it apart over 100 years or something. You don't know it's happening, and then the next thing you know, the thing's cracked or whatever. So the seeds that I used was like a pointing towards that, really. But that's what I was saying about like wanting to do like a bigger work. I would love to do a large scale work that was a large marble sculpture that kind of played with these things, had painting on, had holes in and things like that, and plant lots of things in it, and plant a tree, a small tree in it, and allow it to over the years snap or don't snap, and try and force conservators of the future to think about this and do I make the decision, do they make the decision over whether we take this tree out or kill this tree at some point, or at some point it would destroy the work. So I kind of like this idea over time, and kind of letting the artwork play out over a century or so, or more perhaps, would be really interesting to see. So yeah, we're looking at ways of doing that now.
Maybe when you have your own museum, it could surround your museum.
Yeah.
This work.
We're looking at that. Yeah. Well, I don't know if it'd be that big. I think it would be big enough to have a tree in it.
Yeah, maybe at the front of your museum.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be beautiful, because this looks like jewelry. It looks like embedded with jewels at first sight, if you don't know about the project.
The thing that looks like the jewel is the RFID tag, and it's funny because modern RFID tags are just like white plastic, but this is slightly out of date RFID tag that has this copper wire in it, and I very consciously picked this one because I think that's a reference to, I mean, a sort of subtle, to some of the people that I was talking to in this project. One of them is also working on the Antikythera wreck. So there's the Antikythera mechanism, this ancient computer, basically, with all these cogwheels embedded in it. And then he was working on other objects from it, so statues and things that were found alongside the mechanism. And so we had a long discussion about how that all works. But also, I love the Antikythera mechanism because it's like this super magical, amazing object that just shows to me like how we don't learn, how societies get to a certain advanced level and then something else comes and crushes it, and then and then it takes, how long has it taken us to get back to the Antikythera mechanism level? A long time, and then other things come and crush civilizations, and so it's there's and I wonder about the internet in kind of respect to that, because now knowledge is distributed. So is it harder to destroy knowledge? But then knowledge is so hidden with all the false information as well. So it's another way of doing that. It's another way of burying the Antikythera mechanism in a wreck. Is kind of what we're we're doing now with all the data on the internet. There's false information that appears there. So I was inspired by the Antikythera mechanism and these sort of cogwheels sort of peep through this sort of rocky shell, this encrusted shell, and so it's kind of referencing that with the copper RFID tag, and that's embedded in resin, and then that's got the data in it that points to the blockchain.
Yeah, the addition of the copper and the seeds is very intriguing, you know, and on final thoughts, when I think of your project, as you said, with the tree kind of like cracking through it, you know, and whether the tree lives or dies. And, you know, that's a ethical decision that you guys have to take. But the whole impact of the project, ongoing process, is very beautiful. Well, I'm sure you'll keep updating, and you'll come up with another version of this project.
Yeah, we've got plans to go further with it, and I'm hoping to go to Athens next year, and because this was all ended up being online. So I've been there and worked with them in the past and kind of had meetings and stuff, and then I got funding for the project, and then it was all like stopped by the pandemic, and I couldn't travel when the residency and the funding body were like, well, you have to do it online and do it as an online thing because we can't wait another year for this project to happen. So we did it all online, and actually it went really, really well. It was really intense, but it went really, really well. So what we want to do is kind of take the next step. So they've got the object there now and they're working on it there, but I want to go to the lab and see how, you know, they do the electron microscopy. I mean, I've done that before, but I want to see how they do it and these ideas, and trying to develop other directions with it.
Yeah, it's kind of, it's almost as if by destiny. It's connected with Greece. But John Keats wrote a poem, Ode on a Grecian Urn. So frozen in time. It's almost like that idea on a very different level.
I should look at that again because I'm a big fan of Keats and always quote him.
Yeah, me too.
With my romantic disease, so I should read that one again.
Yeah. Ode on a Grecian Urn, because when I really saw the project, that was what I was thinking, like, this is frozen in time, but it's not quite frozen. It's releasing itself from time.
It's not at all frozen in time. It's about the inability to freeze something in time.
Yeah. So it's like questioning Keats and having a dialogue with Keats.
Yeah. In a way, yes, probably. I'm gonna have to go back and read this poem again. I've read it obviously in the past, but it hasn't really.
No, I know you reference Keats everywhere in your papers, and so I know you're a fan of Coleridge too, right?
No,
Wordsworth and Keats. Wordsworth and Keats.
Pardon?
William Wordsworth and Keats.
Wordsworth, yeah, because he was one of these people who was talking about the sublime and writing about the sublime, and then Keats is this like really amazing link to this idea of the genius who has tuberculosis, and you know this kind of vision of this tubercular genius, consumptive, you know.
He was this visual artist. He was this visual artist who wrote poetry. Keats.
Also the Brontes and like Wuthering Heights, because they all died of tuberculosis as well, the whole family. I'm not laughing about that, but just the irony of all this. And then they don't say it anywhere, but I'm fairly sure Kathy has TB in Wuthering Heights because she's got all the symptoms.
Yeah. When I went to the New Orleans Pharmacy Museum, and all these, the installations they had of diseased people, and they were reminding me of these novels. So it's a lot to talk about. Yeah, so we'll talk about those things in the next talk that we have, whenever that is. But in the meantime, all good wishes to you, Alex, and all involved in the project. And I hope to see you soon, and keep in touch.
Yeah, thank you very much. Bye then.
Bye.